Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Selailo Makudire. The time is 9:50 Central African Time, and we're going to be moving to a rather concerning turn of events out in Knysna, where the water crisis issue has moved from being a looming threat to essentially becoming an emergency. The primary storage dam supplying the scenic garden route town has fallen to around 15 to 18% capacity, and enough for only a matter of days if consumption continues unchecked. And this prompted a declaration of local disaster and stringent level 4 restrictions, and I think around 20 million rand relief allocation coming from national government to try and stabilize supply and repair infrastructure. But behind the pumps and pipelines lies, I think, deeper questions of power, questions of privilege and policy. Who actually gets water during this crisis, and on what terms, and what's behind this failure of water provision for the residents of Knysna? And we're going to be looking at that particular point with senior researcher at the University of Johannesburg Center for Social Development in Africa, Dr. Kaziboni. Doc, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to News and Views. I really appreciate you giving us the time this morning.
Many thanks, Jolani.
I think we'll jump right into it. The Knysna water crisis has been described as being at a critical point at this moment. From your perspective, what's your analysis? How did we get to this point of the situation, and what's behind it? What's at play here, and the water provision failures of the government, and who gets to have water during this crisis and who doesn't, and the power dynamics that are at play?
It's a very important question, Tulani. The the issue of access to water in South Africa needs to be understood, I think, always historically. And if we look at apartheid spatial planning, we are saying that areas that we considered historically white and those that were historically black, farms and mines, were prioritized differently according to the beneficiaries. When looking at the Knysna case now, I think what's unique and fascinating about it is how the infrastructural neglect has gone unchecked for quite some time. And when we talk about power again, it's people in the local municipality who were given the power and the authority as well as the mandate to ensure that systems were in check. And we're now at a critical juncture, and as we have alluded to, where we have, up and around 18% of water only available for the coming few days. And reflecting on, the Western Cape as well, we're coming from, Cape Town's day zero. Why is it that we're here? Why is it that we're here? And unfortunately, the people who bear the brunt of it all, people like me and you, people of color, because South Africa, unfortunately, is a very unequal country. And with inequality, very astronomical poverty rates, we do find that the previously disadvantaged groups don't have access to alternatives.
No, most definitely. And my next question to that is, 30 years on, how have we not moved on from that? Like Knysna, for instance, we know that it's a tourism-driven town, as you mentioned, with very, very stark inequalities. Historic, because of apartheid special planning and how resources, were rationed according to people from what race and which part of, the town you live. How do we get past this 30 years on, and how does class and geography and economic privilege continue to shape access to water, especially during a crisis like this one?
So when we look at the birth of the new country, there was a new constitution which, among others, indicated that each person in the country would have the right of access to water. And from that came a revised National Water Act as well as the Water Services Act. So we do have a robust legislation. But I think it comes down to the implementation of that legislation. we have municipalities that are given the responsibility to ensure that the communities have water. And looking at, again, this specific one, Knysna local municipality, we are in a situation where they had a drought around 2009. Resources were dedicated towards building a desalination plant, which is actually dysfunctional as we speak, and other water alternatives on the basis that it's known to be a drought-prone area. So, aside the biophysical natural limitations that we experience, not only in the region but as a country, there were provisions as early as 2009 to make sure that that specific municipality had the adequate resources. Looking again, which was more fascinating for me, the Auditor General's reports, whilst it noted leaks, around the 30% mark, which is normal, the municipality has consistently gotten no material regularities, which seems to suggest that their books are in check. But the question for me then becomes, how is it that their books are in check, yet there has been infrastructural neglect that's partly contributing to what this situation is? That aside, who are the main beneficiaries of tourism within the context? Are they not able to make alternatives? I'm sure they can. We've seen that even with load shedding, where we had rampant load shedding a few years back, companies, firms, and people in the tourism industries, among others, came up with backup power. But what do people who rely on the state for bare necessities do? They're left without. And who is it again? There's a very fine line in South Africa between class and race. Race, race is almost a marker of where you belong in the social hierarchy, in the economic hierarchy. So it's people of color who then find themselves without. They cannot buy tanks. They cannot arrange for deliveries or other alternative sources, treatment, or even storage itself.
And I think 30 years after apartheid and the new country, as you mentioned, it's very, very unfortunate that these are still, the state events. We're still having these kinds of conversation. But lastly, Prof, looking ahead, what urgent policy shifts or governance reforms are needed to prevent water crises like the ones in Knysna at this current moment from becoming a somewhat permanent feature of South Africa's future? We're seeing similar kind of situations unfold in some parts of Johannesburg, where there are some areas that go months and months without water provision, and there are simply no answers. There's water rationing in some parts of the city, in Johannesburg and other parts of South Africa, where if one area does get water, the other doesn't. How do we mitigate this from becoming a permanent feature, and making sure that it's nipped at the bud if it hasn't fully bloomed yet?
I just want to talk about rationing a little bit and how that concept is problematic, because it allocates a certain allocation of water to a certain number of persons in a household. And we know that South African households can consist of several families. So the moment you link rationing to a household, it becomes illogical for the people who survive within that house, people within those communities. So in terms of what I would propose as key reforms, I think based on the work that I've done and the engagements I've had with other actors in the sector, is firstly to ring-fence operations and maintenance. Because with the Knysna case, something fell through the cracks, and we are at a situation now where the government has put together 20 million rands to ensure that changes happen and people get access to water. But why is it that the books are in check and yet maintenance and repairs were not done historically? I think that's the first. Secondly, it's important to make sure that we reduce non-revenue water. This is water that is not billed, water that that goes through the leaks, water that's lost. So When you're looking at that specific locality, it's about 34% of all piped water is lost. That's money lost as well. And then the third and last one would be smart augmentation and the implementation of technology. We need to find a way of leveraging technologies linked to the fourth industrial revolution. How can we bring in AI, sensors, as well as technologies like blockchain to help detect leaks, optimize pressure, which is AI and sensors, and blockchain to ensure that there is proper, clear, transparent financial management. Whilst we can't replace people, technology must support us. And lastly, and this speaks to municipalities in general and government, we need to have ethical leadership. And water governance must be rebuilt around dignity, fairness, and accountability. Otherwise, the crisis we have in Knysna will become a permanent crisis across the country. And we're seeing it replicate.
No, most definitely. Doc, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time and giving us those very, very important insights on Knysna. For me, it almost feels like a microcosmic of a bigger and broader, crisis that the country will ultimately face if nothing is being done about it. And we're seeing it unfold in Knysna, where privilege ultimately determines if you get water or you don't. So it's really, really concerning. And more needs to be done about it. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
There you go, Dr. Anthony Kaziboni, giving us insights on a very, very concerning turn of events out in Knysna, where the taps are essentially running dry, and there are big debates on who the crisis essentially affects. It looks like the poorest of the poor, black and brown people in the area, are bearing the brunt of this crisis, while the more privileged people who are living in some of the most expensive parts of this picturesque touristy area of Knysna seemingly exempted. And I think 30 years on, after apartheid has ended, we can't continue having these kinds of conversations where the color of your skin ultimately determines whether or not you're eligible to get services or you're not, or you're the first one to suffer the consequences of a broken down system. So I think it's very, very concerning what's happening out in Knysna. And I think to an extent it represents what's happening in the rest of South Africa. People from Johannesburg suffer the same thing. There are people there's no load shedding, but there are people who are still having what is called load reduction. And these are happening in the townships, in some of the outskirts of the city, and areas that are a bit far-flung from the leafy suburbs of the north, for instance. So it's a really, really concerning turn of events where the government and municipalities of the day are more comfortable with failing black and brown people or less privileged people than they are with showing their failures to everyone else, every South African. It's been News and Views. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, it's time for #FiredUp, proudly brought to you by Africa Muslims Agency.